So after reviewing an obscure sci-fi RTS, let's tackle a well-known TBS, that being the turn-based strategy game Battlestar Galactica Deadlock. If you're familiar with my main channel at all, you'll know I'm quite fond of the sci-fi genre, to put it mildly, and watched a shitload of sci-fi TV shows, including the Battlestar Galactica reboot, which I'm a big fan of. In terms of video games though, there are shockingly few prominent BSG games. It's just so ripe for a variety of video game adaptations. The Space Combat Simulator is the obvious one, and there have been some meh attempts at that, but Deadlock is easily the most popular BSG video game around right now, developed by Black Lab Games, most famous for their Starhammer games. Deadlock actually has a lot in common with, or at least it reminded me of, the previously reviewed Nexus to Jupiter incident. Rather than an emphasis on resource gathering and assembling endless hordes of your forces, Deadlock is squarely focused on controlling a small number of capital ships of various classes and using the various abilities of your ships and your own tactics to take out enemy forces and accomplish a few objectives. Now I should specify I've only played the base game for this review. Black Lab has been supporting this game for several years now, releasing a steady stream of paid DLC which adds new ships, new campaigns, etc. And if you're a fan, depending on how you'll react to my opinion, I can already hear some folks shouting, "You'll have to buy such and such to get the real experience." And while the DLC certainly looks like it features a lot of good stuff, I played the game Black Lab initially released as a finished product. This is what they sent out to the public as a finished game, and I basically played it to see if the rest of the DLC is worth it. However, in my view, if you have to spend up to twice the asking price for the base game before Deadlock quote-unquote gets good, I feel like it's kinda shitty. But we'll see if that's the case. Presentation-wise, this is a very handsome-looking game, with wonderfully faithful recreations of the aesthetics of the TV show, with a heap of new ships, stations, etc., which are unique to the game itself. If you're a big fan of spaceship design and you're a fan of this universe, Deadlock has plenty of really great stuff. I love the new colonial and Cylon designs which the game introduces. In the TV show we only got a few glimpses of ships which weren't Battlestars, so I was keen on seeing some smaller destroyers, gunships, cruisers, etc. Graphically, it's pretty strong for a strategy game. With a focus on a smaller amount of ships, this allows for more detailed textures on all of the ships, with some nice destruction animations, although some of the explosions do look a bit naff on occasion. I also appreciate the replay button which shows the battle you just fought in real time, showcased in the same style of handheld cinematography from the show, and it can be cathartic to sit back and watch your ships tear through enemy forces after a long, drawn-out, tense engagement where the player is smushed up against the screen trying to figure out their next move. When it comes to sound design, Deadlock is a little hampered by adherence to the TV show, which had deliberately dulled sound effects as a kind of hat tip to realistic sounds in space. And while that did work for the show, I do think this is where Deadlock could have taken some creative license. I'm not suggesting going back to the pew-pew sound effects of classic Battlestar Galactica, but I do wish the gunfire and explosions had a bit more punch to them. The voice acting is overall pretty good, although I feel like the actual characters are a bit thin. I know strategy games aren't primarily used as examples of the possibilities of interactive storytelling, but a lot of the interstitial dialogue got a bit boring for me. The personalities of these characters are so one-note, it made a lot of the conversations pretty samey after a while. The real highlight of the game's presentation though is the soundtrack, composed by Ash Gibson Greg. I don't know if it's a compliment to a composer to say how much their work resembles someone else, but I had just assumed Bear McCreary had returned to create the score when I heard it. It totally captures that distinctive sound, propelled by Japanese drums and layered with textures from instruments sourced from all over the world. I'm especially fond of the Deadlock title track, as well as Skirmish 3. Just awesome stuff. Gameplay-wise, as I said, this is a fairly traditional turn-based strategy game with an interface extremely similar to the Starhammer series. The UI is streamlined and crystal clear. You'll become familiar with how all the mechanics work in no time. For the campaign mode, there are two types of gameplay. From the campaign map, you spend XP and other resources to acquire new ships and plan missions. Then there are the actual battles. A lot of space strategy games seem to struggle with truly three-dimensional level design, but Deadlock never gets confusing or disorienting, which I have to say games like Nexus the Jupiter Incident and Homeworld sometimes did. Really, it comes down to personal preference in terms of how valuable your immersion is. The camera controls are precise, and it's easy to tell at a glance where all of your ships are going, and mapping out maneuvers, attacks and defenses is pretty quick and easy. Even though it's turn-based, it succeeds in feeling very fast-paced and kinetic. You have to anticipate your enemy well and execute certain fleet actions at just the right time, otherwise 1 foot wrong could mean losing ships pretty quickly. The game can be very punishing, but in a way that only increases the excitement for when you try again. I will admit, I kinda sucked at this game. I am very familiar with strategy games, but this is the first fully turn-based one I've ever played. I'm a big Total War guy, and I've done plenty of Age of Empires, Age of Mythology, Empire at War, Homeworld, Command and Conquer. I've played a lot of strategy games, but it took me a while to get to grips with the pace of Deadlock and get familiar with how tactics are meant to be applied using the game's mechanics. But despite how often I failed at missions, I kept wanting to try again, so it's clearly doing something right. As I mentioned before, the game has a few different modes, 3 to be exact. There's the campaign, skirmish, and multiplayer. The campaign is fine overall, but I can't say it's really one of the strongest I've played. It was cool seeing characters in their younger years like Dr. Cottle, and it was cool to see some ancestors of main characters from the show as well. But in terms of a story, I wasn't totally blown away here. But then again, I know story isn't really a priority to many fans of the genre. I did think the Sagittarian rebels was an interesting element, rightly painting the colonial forces as not strictly the good guys, but this didn't really affect gameplay all that much, beyond changing up which enemy units had to be taken out every now and then. The objectives of each mission were varied, but in practice, kill everyone to win was always the case. The campaign map was a welcome addition though, adding in some optional objectives, and the ability to send detachments of ships to fight the Cylons in the next star system while you prepared for the next mission was a nice feature. What I do think lets it down though is a lack of consequences for your actions. I think an XCOM style mechanic would be cool, where failure to defend a certain world from an attack in time would damage your resources or maybe incur the wrath of some superior officer, that sort of thing. Skirmish mode is obviously just single player battles you set up yourself. You can use points to assemble custom fleets and pit them against AI fleets of comparable strength. While it is loads of fun, this is where the lack of content does show, and likely where the paid DLC has the most impact. The selection of ships isn't exactly huge, and there's a noticeable lack of maps, game types, and factions. While the game is sort of beholden to the source material, which only really had 2 factions, the introduction of the Sagittarian militia or some other Cylon splinter group could open things up a bit more. Maybe that stuff is in some of the DLC, but I refer you to my earlier point about that. Multiplayer has the same lack of content problem as skirmish mode, but it's just more fun fighting against another player. From what I've seen, the community around this game is pretty great, and even though I lost every single battle I entered— whoa, what is that? Oh god. I just saw the state of your fleet. Oh my god. How many is that? 6 gunships and 2 base stars. Fucking hell. I figured. Again, not a big turn-based fan, and I only had a few days to get this review done. I still got plenty of enjoyment out of the experience. And that kind of sums up my general feelings toward Battlestar Galactica Deadlock. I certainly had a good time playing it, and if you're a fan of strategy games and or the Battlestar Galactica universe, I can happily recommend this game to you. For me personally though, I'm afraid to say I'm a creature of habit and do prefer real-time strategy as opposed to turn-based. And in general, I got a lot more out of games like Nexus the Jupiter Incident and Homeworld. Maybe if I have some extra bucks and spare time in the near future, perhaps I'll grab those DLCs I've heard so much about, and if I think it'll be worthwhile, I'll certainly do a follow-up to this review. For now though, I give Battlestar Galactica Deadlock a solid thumbs up, if not a super enthusiastic one. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with new uploads. Feel free to like and share to help the channel grow. Also keep an eye on the community tab to help decide on the next video. Until next time, have a good one. This has been Rowan from SideQuest. Live long and prosper.